Damn it, Daniel, Mossad is lying to you. This bastard is too good not to be on their radar.
They swear they have nothing, not even a Hamas code name.
Israelis tracked down Sheikh Yassin and Rantizi in the heart of Gaza. You cannot tell me that they do not know who this guy is.
This is NCIS, a real meat and potatoes cop show that's been running for 21 years. And for most of that run, it's been weirdly obsessed with Israel.
This tape aired on Al Jazeera after Salim blew himself up along with 9 Israeli civilians on a bus in Jerusalem.
It's the Joint Chiefs' battle plans in the event of an attack on Israel.
Officer David was sent back to Israel.
And she went back to Israel?
Varga was a specialist in Israel.
You're an Israeli Jew, no?
He'd want to kill Israelis.
Brothers in Israel.
I'm Israeli.
Israeli espionage is all over NCIS, with dozens of episodes that include Mossad, which is basically the Israeli CIA. You may have heard about Mossad recently, as they were behind one of the most aggressive and overt acts of espionage in recent years.
News right now, some 150 people have been wounded in Beirut's suburbs and other parts of Lebanon after their handheld pagers reportedly exploded today.
Sources tell CNN the pager attack on Tuesday was a joint operation involving the Israel Defense Forces and the country's major spy agency, the Mossad.
Across Lebanon on Tuesday at around 3:30 in the afternoon, thousands of pagers exploded almost at the same time.
Scenes like this playing out hundreds of times across Lebanon within the space of an hour. A targeted, coordinated, highly technical attack.
On September 17th, 2024, thousands of pagers in Lebanon and Syria exploded, killing at least 42 people and wounding nearly 3,500. This was the latest escalation in the most recent chapter of the Israeli state's ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza that hit high gear following the October 7th attacks in 2023. The pager attack was executed by Mossad against Hezbollah, a group that's been launching rockets into Israel and demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. But it's clear that a ton of Lebanese civilians were caught in the literal thousands of explosions.
These pagers exploded while people were on the road, going about their daily lives, basically, in supermarkets and hospitals, driving their cars, getting their kids from school.
A lot of the coverage of the attack described it with some amount of awe, impressed by the incredible feat of engineering and spycraft that Mossad was able to pull off.
On October 7th, the Israeli intelligence services came across as Johnny English, completely dumbfounded and dumbstruck. Today, they look like James Bond.
A very modern form of unconventional warfare blamed on Israel.
So how much planning do you think went into this sophisticated coordination involving this old-school device?
The New York Times wrote that, quote, Israel demonstrated technical prowess and partly restored the aura of its intelligence agencies. ABC News wrote that the unassuming pager took its place in the annals of Israeli covert operations history. The Washington Post wrote, as an act of spycraft, it is without parallel, one of the most successful and inventive penetrations of an enemy by an intelligence service in recent history. This is illustrative of a larger American media trend, using very different language to talk about Israeli military operations versus the actions of their enemies, you know, the terrorists.
Hezbollah had to come to the full realization of what had only been a suspicion, which is, what if there's more? Now as an organization, they have to look at every device they have, figure out where it came from, how they got it, and if it's compromised, which means paranoia and fear has to be very high inside that organization.
Yeah, maybe put down the Game Boy.
I mean, it's a violent attack with civilian casualties meant to inspire paranoia and fear. Maybe you could describe it as an act of terror. You know, if someone else did it. Now, this is not a new observation. Many have noted how news media often uses selective grammar to emphasize certain killings or deaths. As Elena Dudum puts it plainly for Time magazine, Palestinians seem to die at the hands of an invisible executioner. Palestinians are shot dead. Palestinians starve. Palestinian children are found dead. Palestinians die, they aren't killed, as if their death is a fault of their own. But how did we get here? Why does this blatant double standard go unchallenged by so many? Well, that brings us back to NCIS, and one of its main characters, Ziva David.
Who are you?
Ziva David. Mossad.
You're Israeli?
Very good. The way you made that connection. Mossad, Israeli.
Ziva isn't just an Israeli on TV. She is arguably the most prominent Israeli representation in the history of American television, even to this day. Although to be fair, it's not exactly a stacked field of competition. While Ziva left NCIS way back in season 11, she's periodically returned. And there's even a spin-off scheduled for 2025 called NCIS: Ziva and Tony. Ziva has been praised in Israeli and Jewish publications across the spectrum. In 2012, the Jerusalem Post called her the boob tube's outstanding Israeli patriot, a self-disciplined and self-reliant Zionist warrior, a virtual one-woman army and a sharpshooter guided by an unerring moral compass. The Forward wrote in 2011 that Ziva is our most prominent televisual Israeli, helping in her own way to spread awareness of Israeli culture. And all this kind of got me wondering, how has this show shaped our understanding of Israel as an ally in the war on terror, their brutal methods, and why so many seem blind to the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and the regional war that seems primed to explode? Welcome to Copaganda, a series of videos exploring the portrayal of the police on television and how that portrayal has shaped our understanding of who the police are and what they should be. There's a playlist around here somewhere. It turns out there's a lot of cop shows. I don't know why I say that. I know that it's always right up here. Today, in a very special episode, we're really not going to talk about policing that much. I mean, NCIS does some police work, but we'll get to it. It's complicated. Instead, I want to look at the show's portrayal of Mossad and Israel, because I think it can help us understand what kind of thinking goes into supporting the current genocide in Gaza. Before we get into it, a few things that this video is not. It is not going to be a full history of Israel-Palestine. There are a lot better people for that. I'm just a TV guy. Second, this is not a deep dive into NCIS at large, because holy shit, there is so much to be said about the forensics and the just general war on terror stuff.
And a good lawyer could prove that, but you're not getting a lawyer. You're getting a transfer to a naval base in Cuba. It's called Gitmo. Ever heard of it?
We're not here to talk about that yet. Perhaps in a future video. Patreon.com/skipintro. And finally, while I'm going to be talking specifically about NCIS's portrayal of Israel and Israeli politics, that is separate from Judaism. Critiquing the policies or actions of the nation-state of Israel has nothing to do with the Jewish religion. Just like critiquing George W. Bush's war on terror policies are not anti-Christian, even though he claimed that he was being led by his own brand of white Jesus. American and Israeli Jews are far from a monolith on this issue either. Groups like the Israeli Orthodox Neturei Karta and the American groups Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now have been calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza since November 2023. There has long been Jewish resistance to the occupation, so I don't want to in any way conflate ethnic Jews with the decisions of the nation-state of Israel.
We're trying to get the public to understand what we did in our military service so they understand the prices of continuing the control of millions of Palestinians.
All right, here we go. Let's start by talking a bit about what NCIS is as a TV show. How does it operate? What's its deal? What's the deal with NCIS? NCIS has been one of the top 5 most watched shows every year since 2008, and almost always the most watched show once you take out Sunday night and Thursday night football. And NCIS only has slightly more military propaganda. The show has spawned a slew of creatively titled spin-offs like NCIS LA, NCIS New Orleans, NCIS Hawaii, NCIS Sydney, and NCIS Origins. I mean, how do they come up with these? Even in the streaming age, the series is still pulling in roughly 10 million viewers per episode, and there aren't even any original cast members left. Well, okay, McGee is still on the show, but he's hardly recognizable because the whole Ozempic glow-up, and he's the show's punching bag, so who really cares?
You're 5 o'clock, McGee. Green SUV. Ah, jeez, McGee.
I kept it stealthy.
There's no way around it. NCIS is one of the most popular shows in the history of American television, all while routinely being a punching bag for other comedies.
All the greatest detective shows are focused around a central, usually titular character. Kojak, Monk, Nickus.
Who's Nickus?
You know, Nickus. Sometimes he goes to Los Angeles, sometimes he goes to New Orleans.
Do you mean NCIS?
No.
Hang on. Recent breakup, fanny pack, cat. Quick, who is the lead character on NCIS?
Special Agent Jethro Gibbs.
In your office now.
So sorry, man. We're prepping for a movie. This is gritty indie flick. We play soldiers trying to adjust to life back home.
Seriously, you've never seen NCIS LA?
While technically it's a police procedural, NCIS is a little different from most cop shows. Whereas many shows focus on cops taking to the streets, interviewing witnesses, and gathering evidence, most of the police work on NCIS is done from a lab or an office. The focus is on magical forensics and surveillance, the kind of stuff that most people realize is kind of bullshit.
Can you pull up the bullet trajectory data?
Boss, I really gotta get one of these.
Obviously, budgets permitting. It's a single source.
Wow, it's like if SportsCenter covered terrorism. You know, other than football. Football is a war crime. While there's a lot to be said about forensics, again, we're going to save that for another video. What we need to know here is the result of all that lab work. NCIS mostly takes place in an office, making it more like a light-hearted workplace drama than a hard-boiled cop show. The driving force isn't really the episode-by-episode cases, but rather the inner relationships of the team. It's a bit more of a sentimental show than you'd expect. Like Fast and Furious or The Olive Garden, when you're here, you're family.
Dad. This is why I don't want Tim driving my car. You know, I told Tim that that's my car, and it's not a family car, it's my car.
Gibbs is the patriarchal badge daddy, a Marine sniper suppressing his emotions, kind of like my dad, while guzzling coffee and hitting his kids like he's Red Foreman on That 70s Show. Gibbs is never wrong, because, well, he's the main character.
He's not in the Middle East, he is here. Where'd you get that intel? My gut.
Tony DiNozzo is his misbehaving eldest son, a self-described wildcard and connoisseur of workplace sexual harassment.
Yes, dating was tough.
Need any help with that now, Paula?
No, Tony, thank you. I've been there and I've done that.
Quick question. The pink ones, do they taste like strawberry starburst? Thought you said you weren't seeing anyone.
Tim McGee plays the computer tech nerd who uses the weight of the American surveillance state to solve crimes from the comfort of his own desk, desperately vying for the fatherly approval that he'll never get. And last but certainly not least is Ziva David, the adopted hot Israeli lady assassin princess of the family. The clear favorite of Gibbs, probably because she's so good at killing people.
I've always sensed that there's a strong bond between the two of you. Something shared, perhaps.
She proved herself.
See, McGee, that's the way to get to his heart. Murder. Get off your laptop and just start shooting some people. That family focus and the physical distance from crime helps obscure the fact that nobody seems to really know what NCIS is in real life. Are they cops? Are they soldiers? Ooh, maybe they're magic crime fairies.
What's NCIS?
Can't believe some people have never heard of us.
If you haven't seen the show or just never bothered to pay attention, NCIS is a real-life organization, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They're in charge of investigating any deaths of Navy personnel that aren't ruled natural causes. That's their main thing. But despite being a fairly small federal agency, they're only about 1,250 agents, they also have this insanely broad mandate of counterintelligence, counterterrorism, cyber warfare, national security, and the protection of US naval assets worldwide. It's expansive. The best way to think about NCIS is that they're like all those other deep state three-letter acronyms: NSA, DEA, CIA, FBI, ICE, ATF, ETC. But NCIS is different because they have 4 letters.
Federal authorities. They mean us. 4 stinking letters. NCIS.
This broad mandate is very well represented on the show. One week, they'll be investigating the fake suicide murder of a Marine. The next, they'll be hunting down a cold case serial killer. And in another, they'll be doing a rescue operation in Somalia. They're literally all over the place. While this is how the real-life NCIS operates, I think there's something problematic about the way the show mixes counterterrorism work with what we would consider common policing. Sometimes you'll be watching an investigation into a pretty standard crime you'd find on any cop show, only for it to suddenly turn into a terrorist hunt.
So it wasn't a robbery?
Depends.
Freeze, McGee, don't move!
Car's wired to explode.
As scholar Yvonne Tasker wrote in 2012, the show depends on a fluid understanding of the boundaries between different types of crime. Terrorism is as often motivated by personal as political concerns, and investigations of routine crimes such as drug dealing can lead the team to concerns of national security, whereas what initially seems to be a case of terrorism masks themes of adultery and sexual jealousy, very familiar to viewers of the crime drama. So between the blurring of the crimes and the distance from those crimes and the family aspect as opposed to the mystery aspect, you get this kind of central ambiguity on NCIS. They really don't want you thinking too hard about anything. The show has an almost code-switching ability that allows it to dip in and out of the spy genre, or the crime genre, or the workplace sitcom, in a way that obscures just how little information they give us about what's actually going on with their enemies. Often they're portrayed as extremists falling into one of two camps. They're either unrelatable monsters who just love death.
And that works for you? For now, crazy terrorist kills himself?
Can't really understand that mentality. Doesn't mean I can't accept it.
Or they're just in it for some selfish reason, whether that's money or revenge.
Understand, my feelings about Israel are far from political and hardly personal. It's strictly business. Hell, my own attorney's a Jew.
The show never wants to grapple with any kind of ideology, except to hit basic talking points about them, usually involving some number of virgins.
Muhammad last night, he died for rivers of honey and 72 virgins.
Maybe he wanted to make sure that he got the 70 virgins instead of some Muslim with an alias he used.
Well, he's not in it for the 70 virgins. He'd have no trouble attracting women.
It's always the virgins. While we are going to primarily focus on Arab-coded terrorists in this video, since they're the ones that come up in Mossad plotlines, it's important to note that NCIS has a pretty wide distribution of crazy bad guys. So to see how this dynamic plays out on a more neutral playing field, let's look at Season 9 villain Harper Deering, a venture capital CEO who becomes a terrorist after his son, a Navy sailor, dies in an explosion because his ship wasn't up to spec. So he becomes a terrorist trying to blow up American vessels in order to show off how dangerous they are.
The terrorist attack that killed my son Evan did not need to happen. These recent attacks, the vulnerabilities that I have pointed out, they needed to be disclosed. In sacrificing a few, I have saved thousands of lives.
I mean, who among us hasn't been there? This motive kind of morphs into a more personal vendetta against Agent Gibbs, because Gibbs is the hero of the story. I truly think that's about as deep as it goes.
You have a job to do, Gibbs. I've done mine.
As media critic Robert Applebaum described the episode in 2019, however implausible the story, not the story of Deering's anger, but of what he plans and accomplishes when he acts upon it, it falls into line with a conventional interpretation of terrorist violence, its mainspring being resentment and frustration, focusing his attention on one man who has actually had nothing to do with his son's death, and thus displacing his anger from an institution onto an individual, or perhaps to a suicidal pact, another conventional feature of terrorist violence. The show has very little interest in understanding their enemies, and viewers are kind of just expected to take everything as a given, a state of nature. America is good, so our enemies are bad. Why are they bad? Because they're not us. And also, they're crazy and violent, which we definitely aren't.
You have no rights. You're a terrorist on a U.S. Navy ship.
We're invoking the Patriot Act.
In an hour, you're gonna be flown off this ship, escorted by Agent David and myself, to Aviano Air Base, where you're gonna board a C-37A, and you're gonna be flown to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Once there, you're gonna be staying at a sunny little seaside resort the locals call Gitmo.
I heard a nasty rumor about what goes on down there.
On NCIS, terrorism is kind of just a thing that's always happening. A thing that the agents have to handle like any other natural disaster. Just like there's no way to reduce the number of tornadoes, the best we can do is just limit the damage done by them. But this brings us back to our main question. Why does a lazily written CBS deep state procedural have so much to say about Israeli spies? Did I miss the memo? Is this NCIS Tel Aviv I've been watching? The first major character from Israel introduced on the show isn't actually Ziva. It's a man named Ari Heswari, and he is not a friend to the team. Long story short, Ari is a deep cover Mossad agent infiltrating Hamas, and while he was trying to get inside, he had to do some bad guy terrorist things to look like he was a bad guy terrorist. Ziva is sent in as his handler and to get him out of hot water with any local law enforcement. At least, that's what Mossad thinks. In reality, Ari is half Israeli and half Palestinian and has chosen his Palestinian side and joined Hamas. Although the show, like we laid out before, pretty light on the details of his motivation.
One has to wonder what made him such a sadist.
I don't give a damn. I just want to kill the bastard.
I told you it was an uncurious show. Ari ends up explaining that he joined Hamas because his father, the director of Mossad, killed his Palestinian mother, and now he's a double agent.
It was a retaliatory Israeli strike. On the day I was in Tel Aviv, visiting him, the decades of planning, he had his mole in Hamas. He never knew how much I hated him. Yeah, I almost feel sorry for you.
Is that a triple agent or a quadruple agent? Not a math guy. But Aries' explanation is literally just this 2-minute scene at the end of a multi-episode, multi-season, multi-year arc. The show spends just as much time wondering if maybe he's just an adrenaline junkie.
He needs to face death to feel alive. Maybe to feel anything.
Or maybe it's because he has a personal vendetta against Gibbs because Aerie is so threatened by Gibbs's hyper-masculine center part.
We now think he's here for more personal reasons. He's planning on killing Gibbs.
In the end, Ziva is convinced that Aerie has turned and kills him to save Gibbs. And then the plot twist when Ziva reveals this.
He's my half-brother.
Bum, bum, bum. Show literally sounds like Jane the Virgin when I explain it. Anyways, that's Ziva's introduction to the team, and she joins NCIS as a liaison to Mossad. As a character, Ziva is stern and tough. She's reserved, she's smart, she's fiercely loyal and hyper-capable, something the show frequently credits to her Mossad training.
Shouldn't feel bad. I was trained by the best.
You know, that's what I like about Mossad.
Our training?
Modesty.
But the most important detail about Ziva, she's hot.
You're sweating.
It's hot in here.
I had not noticed.
Really?
I'm not just saying that. Her sex appeal was literally the entire focus of the character creation process. After actress Sasha Alexander left the show in 2005, producers needed a new girl, but didn't really have much to go on other than that. As creator Donald Belisario told TV.com, quote, "I want to go for a European or Australian girl who is very comfortable with her femininity and sexuality." When actress Kota DiPablo auditioned for the part, the actor who plays Tony Donoso, Michael Weatherly, deviated from the script, pushing her hair behind her ear and saying, "My God, you are so pretty, you remind me of Salma Hayek." As DiPablo told her alma mater Carnegie Mellon, "My primary thought was, don't let this guy get physically close to you." And at that moment, everybody in the room started laughing and thought it was the funniest thing in the world because the chemistry between the two characters was perfect. Impressed with how she dealt with Weatherly going off script and being generally creepy, they gave her the job and insisted that she not take a cab ride home, but instead ride with Weatherly so they could work on their chemistry. DiPablo resisted, but eventually she was kind of forced into it. Carnegie Mellon quotes Weatherly talking about the car ride like this. "Initially, I thought, wow, this is a frosty, unfriendly, almost mean girl, but by the end of it, I dropped her off and thought, wow, she's kind of sweet deep down." So to recap, the showrunners of NCIS were looking for a girl, and the only thing they had to go on was that she had to be a hot foreigner and had to be cool with creepy co-stars. Got it. I tell this story to illustrate just how much the core of Ziva's character is to be eye candy that can give a feisty retort to misogyny.
Ever been tied up by a woman before? Huh? Did you like it? Huh. I think today's not your lucky day.
And the details about her being Israeli and part of Mossad were an afterthought. This one-track mind on her being hot first and foremost is even further highlighted by the fact that DiPablo isn't Israeli. She's Chilean, which is, let me check my map, almost literally could not be further away from Israel. As the Jerusalem Post reported in 2007, DiPablo, quote, spent the first 10 years of her life in Santiago, the eldest daughter of an upper-class right-wing family, and given the social stratification of Chilean society, never met a Jewish child, or, for that matter, any poor people. Despite this background, DiPablo actually thinks she's a pretty good fit for this role, telling the Post that once she finally did get around to meeting some Jewish people, she immersed herself in the history of World War II, the Holocaust, the capture of Adolf Eichmann, and became fascinated by the Jews' struggle for survival. I identified with them. It's same vibes as this.
Your great-great-great-grandfather, Robert Elliott, was part African American.
I knew it. I knew it. Thank you, God. I always felt akin to black people.
Now, it is absolutely wild to say that you identify with Holocaust survivors as a privileged right-winger, but especially in Chile, since there was a whole-ass Nazi concentration camp run by actual Nazis after the war that did some torturing for Pinochet in the 1970s. It was just a quick 4-hour drive from where DiPablo grew up.
The military government and the colony each found something they needed in the other. Paul Schaeffer needed new political allies and protection. And Pinochet's agents, who were versed in only the most crude forms of torture, wanted someone to teach them the more sophisticated methods of interrogation. Another ex-Nazi who was a welcome guest at Colonia Dignidad was Walter Rauff. the man responsible for creating mobile gas chambers that led to 100,000 deaths.
Wait a second. Family was upper class and right-wing during the Pinochet regime? Come here, Kota. Who is it you identify with? You said you identify with them. Who's the them? Who's the them? But even though the character wasn't designed to be any deeper than hot, making her Israeli is an interesting choice, given that the Israeli military has long used hotness and sex to recruit. If you've been on TikTok, there's a high chance that you've encountered gun waifu, or a similar account featuring hot IDF soldiers in ridiculously tight clothing showing off the guns they use to mow down the children of Gaza. It's important to remember just who they're bragging about killing. 43.5% of the Gaza Strip's population is under the age of 15. Oxfam International places conservative estimates of the Gazan children killed in the year since October 7th at 11,000, accounting for nearly 1/4 of the dead. Little less Rambo, a little more Casey Anthony. Gun waifu, aka Natalia Fadiv, is a member of the Alpha Gun Angels, whole-ass network of gun-toting IDF models who primarily post what amounts to military nationalist propaganda. Journalist Sophia Goodfriend described an Alpha Gun Angels appearance at a massive Israeli military expo for the magazine Jewish Currents in 2019, writing, quote, "The Angels render Israeli militarism sanitized, sexy, and saleable, effacing the specific lethal effects of its defense and security apparatus. It doesn't matter what the gun or combat accessory can do or has done to occupied people. It just matters that the Angels look good doing it." I mean, just look how hot they are with their guns. And this isn't a case of just some soldiers having fun while they're taking a break from bombing heavily populated areas. The IDF itself has even posted some of these thirst traps to their official Twitter account, claiming that it was a picture they'd use to catfish their enemies, but I don't know, feels about as flimsy as, "Felt cute, might delete later, ooh." Of course, this isn't new. Back in 2007, IDF veterans, including future Wonder Woman Gal Gadot, posed for sexy photos in Maxim, next to captions describing their favorite parts about being IDF soldiers, like, "I loved shooting the M16, and I was good at hitting the targets." You gotta practice on the small targets because you're aiming for kids and they're tiny. You know, they haven't grown yet. And it's not just hot ladies promoting the IDF. In 2012, Electronic Intifada found a whole slew of naked Israeli men under the IDF tag on Instagram. And looked at some of the other posts on those accounts, like this one, captioned, "Fuck all Arabs, their blood is tasty." Literally vampire shit. The Israeli sex sells approach goes deeper than simple military recruitment as well. You may have heard about Birthright Israel, an organization that sponsors Jewish diaspora community members to visit Israel and learn about their heritage. It is the largest educational tourism organization in the world, with about 20% of American Jews between the ages of 18 and 46 having taken the trip. While the trip is ostensibly about introducing tourists to historic sites and learning about Israeli culture, that's not the only goal. As Kiara Feldman wrote in The Nation in 2011, quote, "The common denominator of Birthright experience is the promotion, by turns winking and overt, of flings among participants, or between participants and soldiers. No problem if there's intimate encounters," an Israel Outdoors employee told American staffers during training. In fact, it's encouraged. Birthright boasts that alumni are 51% more likely to marry other Jews than non-participants. Birthright was conceived of by Yossi Beilin, an Israeli politician who felt that intermarriage was diluting Jewish identity and wanted to create a situation where spouses are available. That's why Birthright only accepts applicants between the ages of 18 and 26, for fertility reasons.
Hey, did you know that a woman's fertility starts to decrease about the age of 25?
And it's not like Birthright is apolitical. Feldman writes that, quote, "No longer is it simply a project to shore up Jewish identity. Birthright has joined the fight for the political loyalties of young Jews." She goes on to describe her tour like this. The tour guide used Palestinian interchangeably with terrorist. Driving through northern Israel, Shachar gave a lesson on Judaization, the government's term for settlement policy. Passing through an Israeli Arab town, he called our attention to a litter-strewn road, perhaps the result of inequities in municipal funding, which escaped mention, and then pointed to a neat ring of state-subsidized Jewish towns. Judaization, he explained, was necessary to keep them from spreading.
Birthright and what it does by refusing to discuss, show the occupation, or even allow us to hear from Palestinians, What it's really doing is hiding the occupation from young American Jews like myself.
Now, I'm not saying you're a bad person if you went on or enjoyed a birthright trip. They look fun as hell. Who wouldn't want hot people thrown at you while you're encouraged to fuck them all in what is likely the first international trip you've ever taken without your parents? That sounds like the beginning of a pretty rad 2000s party movie. What I am saying is that trying to manipulate how people breed in order to create some pure, undiluted race of people just kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. It never seems to work out well. And I think that when we look at Ziva, whose two defining characteristics are being hot and being an Israeli assassin, we start to head towards some troubling territory. The Israeli state often uses women soldiers to draw a contrast between them and the comparative sexual repression of their Arab neighbors, portraying Israel as a protector of women and the queer community. And while Israeli law is certainly more progressive on some of these issues, it's not like they're only dropping bombs on cis-het Palestinian men. They're not smashing the patriarchy. Speaking of sex, NCIS can't shut the fuck up about it.
Why don't you visualize her naked? Does she intimidate you?
A woman hasn't been born yet who can intimidate Anthony DiNozzo.
If you tell McGee, I'm gonna post those bikini photos that I have on the agency website.
I told you to destroy them.
Well, a man's gotta have leverage.
Misogyny is kind of a defining feature of NCIS as a TV show.
Oh, well, women.
Tony is constantly hitting on women in creepy ways, and female coworkers are routinely dismissed or bulldozed by their male colleagues.
Any problem taking orders from me?
As director or as a woman?
Go easy, Hoss. She was just doing what she was told.
You do not get to determine what is worth sharing and what is not.
I don't answer to you, Agent Gibbs.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
On the job, it is Director Shepard or ma'am.
Okay, what about off the job?
There won't be any off the job, Agent Gibbs.
That's too bad. I missed you, Jen.
All of the men on the show partake in this behavior. Even McGee sports his own brand of nice guys misogyny.
I couldn't decide between childish, juvenile, and just plain old annoying.
It's true.
And you know better. But you're so busy playing the faithful sidekick, you just go along for the ride.
Gibbs and Ducky embrace the label chauvinist.
Just face it, Jethro. You and I are a couple of old chauvinists. Women will never be equal in our eyes until they're equal in death.
Boy, I bet they're really into Andrew Tate today. Speaking of an alleged sex criminal, it should be noted that Michael Weatherly has been involved in some really gross workplace sexual harassment. Actress Polly Perrette accused star Mark Harmon of attacking her, and also that the showrunner for NCIS New Orleans was fired for his own brand of sexual misconduct. But the jokes the team makes are accompanied by quirky music, so they're actually just funny sexists.
First things first, gotta narrow down prospective agents. It's gotta be a woman.
Those are just the women.
Are there photos in here, boss?
Boss, really? Tony picks? Because, coming from anyone else, that might be considered a lapse in judgment.
Okay, you both picked.
That makes much more sense.
You don't trust me to be professional?
No casting couch.
Tony, I just died, and you're having a sexual fantasy?
Can't help it. Well, that's nice.
Isn't it?
You know what's even nicer? My current view. Victoria's Secret, Agent Cassidy.
See, it's a joke. Just listen to the music. Yeah, hee-hoo, woohoo. What's a little sexual workplace harassment between friends? Now, I'm not just bringing this up to dunk on NCIS's sexism, because there's a pretty disgusting sexist spectrum on the show. When it comes to the Israelis on the show, they're portrayed as sex positive and sexually active.
Am I sensing something between the two of you?
Nothing serious.
You haven't slept together then?
Well, of course we are sleeping together. It's just nothing serious.
Gotta get back to Israel.
And when it comes to the Arabs on the show, they're portrayed as hyper-sexist and hyper-misogynist.
Director Vance's wife was caught in the crossfire.
Vance's woman is dead as well.
Her name was Jackie.
Being slapped by a woman is twice the insult to Bassam.
She doesn't know?
Why should she? She's just a woman.
Women should never get involved in politics. It's a waste of beauty.
You are a woman.
You're a genius.
I have no problem with women. But I cannot vouch for my men.
But really, this is all the same harassment and misogyny, right? The Americans, Israelis, and Arabs are all engaging in the same kind of sexism, but it's portrayed on a kind of sliding scale of acceptability. Crucially, with Americans at the top of the ethical ladder.
Excuse me?
Ari is a chauvinist. He is taking out the women I work with before me.
Gibbs, I thought you were proud to be a chauvinist yourself. Game recognized game, I guess. The point is that it is literally the same behavior, identified for being that behavior, but with the gravity of the accusation having everything to do with the color of that character's skin. And this weird moral hierarchy isn't just reserved for sex. It's also the best way to view the show's perspective on violence and Middle Eastern geopolitics. For as much as Mossad and Israel are represented on NCIS, the show's portrayal of them is far from glowing. Instead, you might actually be surprised to learn that it's pretty antagonistic right from the jump. As I mentioned earlier, the show's first portrayal of a Mossad agent is Ari Haswari, who turns out to be a double agent working for Hamas. When Ziva shows up to handle the situation, Gibbs immediately confronts her with this.
That's all we ask. Don't kill the wrong man.
Like Mossad did in Norway.
That mistake cost us dearly.
Not as dearly as the Palestinian waiter you killed.
Now, what Gibbs is referring to is known as the Lilyhammer affair, where, in 1973, Mossad operatives assassinated a Moroccan waiter, not a Palestinian, in Norway, shooting him 13 times in front of his wife. Turns out they had the wrong guy, mistaking him for a Palestinian militant. An honest mistake. You know, he was brown, the guy they were looking for was brown. They're not even from the same continent. It was an international incident, and Norwegian law enforcement captured and convicted several of the Mossad agents involved. So Gibbs bringing this up is pretty hostile, right? At the very least, it brings up a massive Israeli fuck-up and highlights an assassination program that has been internationally criticized. According to New York Times Magazine writer Ronan Bergman, since World War II, Israel has used assassination and targeted killing more than any other country in the West, in many cases endangering the lives of civilians. Just this year, Israeli assassinations of Hamas and Hezbollah leaders have been carried out by airstrikes, killing dozens in the process.
Well, these are the scenes overnight of the camp in Rafah set ablaze. The Israeli military claim 2 senior Hamas officials were killed in the strike with what they called precise munitions. Local officials say most of the casualties were women and children.
Hell, in Mossad's decades-long quest to assassinate Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, former defense minister Ariel Sharon even ordered an attack on a commercial plane carrying a doctor, 30 children, and crucially, not Yasser Arafat. Thankfully, the mission leader called the airstrike off. But if you haven't noticed, that hasn't exactly stopped the Israeli military from bombing hospitals or refugee camps in the years since.
Hospital workers over the past 12 months, as well as having to deal with the most horrific of injuries that they're tending to, have also had to evacuate, have had to pack up time and time again as a result of evacuation orders, as a result of fighting.
NCIS definitely highlights this kind of recklessness and collateral damage, often depicting Mossad operations with big explosions. Mossad operations are not only messy, Ari is far from the only shady agent in their ranks. Ziva and Ari's father, the head of Mossad, Eli David, sends an agent named Michael Rivkin to spy on an American intelligence summit, where he actually kills an ICE agent to avoid being discovered.
Dead man is ICE.
That's cold. Immigration Customs Enforcement.
Oh no! Think of all the families that ICE agent won't be able to rip apart. And in classic messy NCIS style, the show also retcons Ziva's introduction to the team as a covert mission her father sent her on, assassinating Ari in order to gain Gibbs' trust and provide intelligence back to Mossad from inside NCIS.
Ari was out of control, so Ziva's father sent her to eliminate him. She kills Ari, earns your trust. 2 birds, 1 bullet.
It really does sound like a deep state telenovela. In the 10th season, NCIS hunts down a rogue Mossad agent named Ilan Bodnar, who assassinated Eli and tried to frame Iranian intelligence so that he could become the new director of Mossad, which is how that would work.
Mossad claims Bodnar acted alone. The Israelis are as anxious to find him as we are.
He hired the hitman, but when Ames took himself out, Bodnar finished the job himself.
Depending on you. Take out Ziva.
Take over as director of Mossad.
So I wouldn't say that this portrayal of Mossad or Israel is kind. NCIS even engages in a pretty boring and tired anti-Semitic trope, where the show brings into question Ziva's dual loyalties to Israel and to NCIS, giving more credence to the idea that this show is maybe not all that fond of Israel.
Are you by any chance questioning my loyalty?
I'm worried, because you don't seem to understand that your secret friend is interfering with this agency's ability to shut down a terrorist cell.
You've been in the service of two masters for too long. Your loyalty to your father and Mossad predates anything else.
Because, Ziva, I don't know who you answer to anymore, NCIS or Mossad.
What is it you expect from me?
I expect your loyalty to me, and only me.
But in classic code-switching NCIS fashion, the show morphs this anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalties into a more purely misogynistic one. You see, Ziva's dad is Eli David, the head of Mossad, but her adopted dad is Gibbs.
Eli is all but dead to me. And the closest thing I have to a father is accusing me.
As critic Eaton Kensky summed it up in 2011, quote, "She's not loyal to a tradition or a nation, but to a daddy." I'm telling you, these writers literally cannot comprehend someone believing in something. But the tense relationship portrayed on NCIS between American and Israeli intelligence is pretty historically accurate. In the 1960s, the Kennedy administration sought intelligence over the Israeli nuclear program. In 1984, actual NCIS agent Jonathan Pollard was revealed to have been stealing classified material from Mossad. The US has periodically criticized Israeli intelligence for targeted killings, and the Snowden leaks revealed that American and British spies had targeted the Israeli Prime Minister. Likewise, in 2019, Israel was accused of planting listening devices inside the White House. Trump was unbothered. But despite this history, you'd be wrong to think that Israeli intelligence is viewed as anything but our closest and most abusive partner. Those Snowden leaks also reveal that the NSA shares its raw, unredacted data of American civilians with Israel. As The Guardian reported in 2013, quote, "But the memorandum makes clear that the information shared with Israelis would be in its pre-minimized state. Israel is allowed to receive raw SIGINT, signal intelligence, including, but not limited to, unevaluated and unminimized transcripts, gists, facsimiles, telex, voice, and digital network intelligence metadata and content." And like in real life, NCIS and Mossad remain close throughout the show's history, despite the many betrayals.
Sometimes patience is a necessity. Otherwise, you end up making an enemy out of your friend. And then we end up with a dead American and a dead Israeli. And I know that's the last thing either one of us wants.
At no point is Israeli allyship ever in question. Even when they've killed an American law enforcement agent in an attempt to spy on an intelligence summit, that feels like a big deal.
Oh, I understand, Eli. I don't judge you. I never have.
Sure, NCIS shows that they're messy, both in terms of their targeted killings and in terms of their loyalty. But Ziva is always the main contact, and she plays the role of a good immigrant, the kind of person who can be reformed and shown the American way, eventually quitting Mossad and becoming a full-fledged NCIS agent. And while the show presents us criticisms of Israeli policy, we can see that same moral hierarchy here that we saw with misogyny and sex. You can hear it in the way that the show talks about Mossad and Hamas, using the exact same language.
Hamas is like the mafia. They'd never trust anyone outside the family.
Sounds like the mafia, one big happy family.
When NCIS operates like a big happy incestuous family, that's great. But when non-Americans do it, it's the mafia. When it comes to violence, it's even more blatant. Palestinians, they love killing people and they don't care who else they hurt in the process.
Wars are measured in body counts. The news carries a running tally. You change the world with rivers of blood. There is no reason to kill just one person.
Israelis are portrayed as loving violence too, with the show especially hammering home the idea that Eli David is a monster for training his children to be assassins.
But most of the time the others, I can feel them looking at me and silently wondering, how can a father possibly raise his daughter to be a professional killer?
But in a gesture the show never offers to Arabs, it goes out of its way to tell us that the Israelis are only so violent because you couldn't possibly understand the pressure they're under.
The view from where I sit is quite different. The threats are immediate. Every day is a fight to survive. It is my dream that my daughter will not have to make that decision with her sons and her daughters. I am saddled with responsibilities that you cannot possibly fathom. The safety of a nation,
when every one of our neighbors wants us dead.
And the Americans, well, it's no accident that Gibbs is a sniper.
Looks sweet the way you hold that, boss.
A kind of symbol of precise, clean violence. He can come and go without a trace, killing only the crazy bad guys and nobody else.
Remember when I told you my boss was a sniper?
On NCIS, when we do violence, it's unambiguously justified.
Oh, jeez. Well, all I can say is if we killed them, they must have been bad guys.
When the Israelis do it, it's not good, but, you know, it's necessary.
I don't have the luxury of allowing my feelings to dictate my actions.
And when the bad guys do it, well, that's just evidence that they're evil.
How can you support any group that lets their children blow themselves up?
Their leaders say that suicide bombers are all they have to fight with.
Sir, when Hamas leaders start blowing themselves up, I'll consider it.
Yes, because our president is always on the front lines. We don't send children, but we do send 18-year-olds that can't afford to go to college. No Child Left Behind threatened to cut federal funding from schools that didn't give military recruiters private student information.
No Child Left Behind guarantees schools federal funding as long as they grant recruiters access to students on campus. Unlike the rest of us who have to show ID, recruiters can walk right in, no questions asked.
I mean, check out these military recruiters reaching out to literal children at a gaming convention.
The Army is here at one of the world's top gaming expos to showcase its latest recruitment tool, the U.S. Army esports team.
Maybe as good as me one day.
Their goal, turning virtual fighters into real soldiers.
The newest Call of Duty Black Ops is literally about how we need to take out Saddam Hussein before he unleashes weapons of mass destruction. Where have I heard that before?
Year after year, Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Luckily, Saddam's WMDs in Call of Duty are obviously fictional. It's a video game. But, you know, so were they in real life.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
When we do it, it's recruitment. When brown people do it, it's brainwashing. And when Israel does it, it's kind of intense, but I don't know, maybe I would do that too. Who's to say? It's really complicated. If you've ever engaged with anything involving Israel and Palestine, you've probably heard it described with the word complicated.
These nations, Israel and Palestine, have 75 years of ongoing tensions and conflict beginning in the mid-20th century until now, and it's very complicated.
Of all the regions in the world, none may have as complicated a history as the Middle East.
It's basically impossible to predict what's going to happen in a place this complicated.
Sure, people are largely not in favor of the Israeli military bombing the streets of Gaza, killing thousands of innocent women and children. But they're also not in favor of attacks like the ones on October 7th, for the same reasons. Plus, doesn't Israel have a right to exist? Don't we owe the Jewish people a safe homeland after the horror that was the Holocaust? And someone else brings up the Nakba and the decades-long ethnic cleansing campaign in the Gaza Strip and the mission to push Palestinians out of the West Bank through colonial settlements, and you kind of just throw your hands up in the air and say, ugh, it's just really complicated. If we're being as charitable as possible, I think this is the kind of opinion that NCIS leaves its viewers with. Sure, Mossad is sketchy and bad, but so are the terrorists. They're both bad, I don't support either. This is a sentiment that's very popular in America, claiming some kind of neutrality while also wondering if, I don't know, maybe it's okay since those guys are even worse.
Okay, real quick. You don't think that I support Israel, do you?
I don't, but I think
Okay,
that...
good.
No, I don't think you support Israel, but I think you saying
No, I
that
don't.
like
Not
Palestinians are immoral or evil or have an evil, antiquated culture or are barbaric is not only ahistorical. What's up?
I do think that.
You can hear it when activists protesting for a ceasefire or arms embargo are confronted with the, but do you condemn Hamas?
You support Hamas, do you not?
Senator, oddly enough, I'm going to say thank you for that question because it demonstrates the purpose of our hearing today in a very
Let's start
effective
first
way.
with a yes or no.
Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization that I do not support, but you asking the executive director of the Arab American Institute that question very much puts the focus on the issue of hate in our country.
And I think that the general ambiguity of NCIS's plot feeds into this. Is Mossad on our side? Are they good? Are they bad? Well, it's complicated. If you're just focusing on the show's portrayal of Israel Israel and Mossad, it's tempting to view this as muddying the waters. Next time viewers see a debate about Israeli military policy and they think back to the only exposure they've ever had to that organization, a CBS TV show called NCIS, they'll throw up their hands and say, I don't know, it's complicated. This is the prevailing opinion in the United States. According to an October 2024 Pew Research poll, 36% of Americans said that they weren't sure if Israel was going too far or not in its military operations, more than any other response. But "it's complicated" is a thought-terminating cliche that only serves the status quo. Because what this portrayal glosses over is the fact that the United States is not a neutral observer here. Because you know what's not complicated? United States military aid to Israel. Since October 7th, the Biden administration has sent a record $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel, and politicians of both parties support unconditional ongoing aid, even as the Israeli military uses American munitions to commit war crimes. Amnesty International has documented a pattern of unlawful attacks by Israeli forces in the occupied Gaza Strip, including indiscriminate attacks that failed to distinguish between civilians and military objectives, and which caused mass civilian casualties. And this isn't a new development. Axios estimates that more than 80% of Israel weapon imports from 1950 to 2020 were from the US, and that the US foreign military financing represents around 15% of Israel's defense budget in recent years. Israel has received more than twice as much military aid from the United States as any other country has since 1946, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. During that same time period, the Israeli military has routinely conducted not just targeted killings, but attacks that deliberately target densely populated communities and downtown buildings. Yet despite this asymmetry, $18 billion in aid to the Israeli military and less than 3% that total for humanitarian aid in Gaza, American media repeatedly covers Palestine in a way that they would never refer to Israel. Here's CNN host Jake Tapper saying that the deaths of Palestinian civilians is unfortunate, but really, Hamas forced Israel to bomb heavily populated areas, right?
Did they not anticipate Israel would retaliate in a way that would cause innocent Palestinians in Gaza to die? Especially given the fact that, as has been established by Israeli intelligence, US intelligence, and journalists who have visited Gaza, the fact that Hamas embeds within the Palestinian population.
Compare that to CNN's coverage of Iran's missile strike on Israel, which is portrayed as a dangerous escalation of violence.
That among the targets were Israeli airfields, but also, and this is crucial, the headquarters of Mossad, the international intelligence service of Israel, which is inside Tel Aviv. It's in the northern part of Tel Aviv, but it's in the city. It's in a densely populated area. And of course, the concern is if you're firing, even though Iran might consider that a military target, it is in a densely populated city with civilians around it.
Dare I say, it's embedded.
That Hamas embeds within the Palestinian population.
It seems like the Israeli military is never to blame for the bombs they drop, whereas the innocent Palestinians, well, they just gotta die, and if they have a problem with that, they should probably take it up with Hamas.
They think that even though they're the government of Gaza, it's not their responsibility to protect Palestinian civilians. The tunnels are for themselves, for fighting.
The kids of Gaza just gotta vote out Hamas already. I mean, once they get old enough to vote. Vote harder!
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
And despite some empathetic rhetoric about Palestinian civilians being killed,
given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon, it is devastating.
The Biden administration has been steadfast in its commitment to unconditional military aid to Israel, ultimately dismissing the massive leverage the US has to end this conflict. A threat to withhold aid could end this stage of the genocide tomorrow. And while the administration has publicly suggested this idea, the Harris campaign assured Zionist voters in Michigan that they didn't really mean it. As the Times of Israel reported, a representative called it, quote, a political gesture that did not reflect any change in policy in the administration. But the Biden administration recently admitted that the only way they want this to end is with the complete destruction of Hamas.
We've never wanted to see a diplomatic resolution with Hamas.
Well, okay. Well, what about the ceasefire?
We wanted to see a ceasefire, but we have always been committed. We have always been committed to the destruction of Hamas.
And this comes while Israeli officials have repeatedly claimed that there is no difference between Palestinian citizens and Hamas. Knesset Deputy Speaker Nissim Vaturi said that the goal of the operation was, quote, erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth, after having been blocked already for calling followers to, quote, Burn Gaza now, nothing less. The Israeli defense minister even characterized the siege of Gaza in 2023 as, quote, fighting human animals.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
The Israeli government has even posted and promoted on their official account in a now deleted video that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza.
On October 7th, many Gazan civilians participated in killing, raping, and looting.
אין שם אזרחים תמימים. זה משפחות תחת החמאס.
The optics of the Israeli campaign in Gaza and now Lebanon are so horrific that they require this kind of doublespeak in order to maintain support. For example, President Biden postured publicly that he was dismayed by the escalation of violence and long sought to avoid it. But this is one of those situations where if he wanted to, he would, ladies. Withhold aid, that is. Instead, just like the way NCIS's criticisms of the Israeli intelligence machine don't actually mean anything, Biden's posturing is just that, posturing. Because recent reports show that the administration was actually a-okay with a ground invasion all along. The violence needs to be publicly condemned, sure, but it also must continue because those victims of violence are even worse. They would do so much worse to us if they could. Just trust me on this.
Did you make love to her? And then blew her brains out? She would do the same to me.
Those kids, they must just be born bad. It's in their genes. Meanwhile, the American state has a long history of cracking down on pro-Palestine protests. In 1979, 4 years after being publicly called out for illegally surveilling and infiltrating American political and civil rights organizations, the FBI did the exact same thing again to the General Union of Palestinian Students, finding no evidence of terrorism, but still monitoring the group for 10 years purely for political speech. According to a 2012 Associated Press report, the NYPD surveilled Muslim college students across the Northeast US without a warrant, far beyond their jurisdiction, including in Pennsylvania and Connecticut, often without any evidence of any wrongdoing. One officer, after tailing a group of students across the state, noted some very suspicious activity, namely that, quote, the group prayed at least 4 times a day, and much of the conversation was spent discussing Islam and was religious in nature. In other words, they were being surveilled for being Muslim, which is illegal, theoretically. And if you think this has gotten better since the October 7th attacks, you can just turn off the video now. I'm not going to reach you. This year, Ilan Pappé, an anti-Zionist Israeli historian and professor, was detained and interrogated by Homeland Security about whether he was a supporter of Hamas, whether he thought Israel was committing a genocide, and what his solution in the Middle East was. He was also asked to name names of Arab and Muslim friends. Just this year, Mike Turner, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, used this anti-Palestinian animus to defend warrantless spying on US citizens. According to a report from Wired, his presentation implied that New York protesters demanding that the US halt weapons sales to Israel were responding, quote, to what appears to be a Hamas solicitation, while arguing against an amendment that would force the FBI to get warrants before collecting phone calls, emails, and texts of Americans. Although that's largely a technicality, because as one Republican legislative director who was quoted in the piece noted, yeah, it's true you can't target protesters under 702, but that doesn't mean the FBI doesn't still have the power to access those emails or listen to those calls if they want. Let me just again remind you that the US already shares unredacted raw metadata about American citizens with an organization that has conducted more targeted assassinations than any other in modern world history. It doesn't seem to particularly care about the bystanders they kill in the process. Just worth noting, just reminding you all of that. Also worth noting is that I very much want to continue this YouTube channel and continue uploading. So if that were to stop for any reason, and I know I've focused a lot on critiquing Democrats here because, you know, they're in power, but rest assured I know that this is going to get a whole lot worse with Trump too, double the tantrums, probably embracing the more mask-off elements of this double standard.
Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one that wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job.
But make no mistake, continuing the ethnic cleansing in Palestine is a bipartisan position, or at least profiting off of it is. NCIS prepares its viewers to hear criticisms of Israeli geopolitical policy, but still side with them, or at least muddying the waters enough to inspire paralysis in the audience. These criticisms are not substantive or impactful because they're still portrayed as better than the alternative. Rather, it serves to whitewash their brutality, not denying it, but instead justifying it.
Ziva,
is the sharp end of the spear.
It provides cover for people to either side with Israel or to claim a false sense of neutrality. And I think that the way NCIS uses these double standards for Israeli intelligence and their enemies is emblematic of the way America at large has responded to the latest escalation in this conflict. People will hide behind its complicated nature in order to draw some of the most insane comparisons I've ever read. Pulitzer Prize winner and war on terror apologist Thomas Friedman recently wrote in the Seattle Times that, quote, "I totally understand the distress coursing through these two communities. Arab and Muslim Americans with friends and family in Gaza or Lebanon or the West Bank worry every day about loved ones being killed or wounded with US-made weapons that were transferred to Israel. Jewish Americans have had to worry every day about their kids being exposed to left-wing anti-Zionism on US college campuses." On the one hand, we have people dying. On the other hand, some students were exposed to new ideas on college campuses that they didn't like. Those are the stakes we're talking about. While there is a near constant clamor for anyone asking for a ceasefire to also condemn Hamas, Israel has been assassinating negotiation partners all over the region. From Ismail Haniyeh, the lead Hamas negotiator, to Hassan Nasrallah, a Hezbollah leader who had agreed to a ceasefire before being assassinated. All of this while the families of Israeli hostages taken on October 7th are still waiting for their loved ones to be returned. I don't know, maybe it'd be easier to negotiate the release if you hadn't assassinated your negotiation partners. I don't know. I'm no Tommy Frieds, but it might help. Other hostages have been killed in the Israeli military's carpet bombing of Gaza, or shot by their own soldiers. The Israeli military doesn't seem particularly worried about who gets caught in the crossfire. Besides the tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians killed over the past year, the IDF has also fired on Indonesian and Irish troops positioned in southern Lebanon on peacekeeping missions. As IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari told Haaretz, quote, "Right now we're focused on what causes maximum damage," echoing the dozens of statements from Israeli officials presented as evidence in the International Criminal Court's genocide and apartheid cases this year.
בוא נאפשר סיוע הומניטרי של מזון ותרופות משטחנו לרצועת עזה.
There's no denying that Israeli military and espionage operations are brutal and morally questionable. But if NCIS shows us anything, it's that simply acknowledging those criticisms doesn't necessarily mean anything if there's no material change behind it. This is why activists have switched their call for a ceasefire to that of an arms embargo. You can't really say that you're working towards an arms embargo while also sending billions in arms to continue the war. As Amanda Klasing, National Director of Government Relations at Amnesty International, told The Intercept, "I do believe that the US suspending the transfer of arms would send a significant message to the government of Israel that its conduct is inconsistent with international law. And the US will not risk complicity with that. Right now, all the US has done is have words. We just have not seen action to really push the government of Israel to adhere to tenets of international law." The trick that this intentionally muddied portrayal pulls is that it makes it seem as though we're watching football and picking a team to root for. But nearly $18 billion in your tax money has been spent to bomb a densely populated area filled with children, only to then continue bombing in the refugee camps where they were told to flee to. Look, this isn't that complicated. American tax money is being spent to kill children at a scale that frankly breaks my brain. Let's stop bombing children. Huh? Oh, huh? Arms embargo. Now! And if you'd like to support Palestinian children much more directly, I've included a link in the description to the Middle East Children's Alliance, a non-profit humanitarian aid organization that delivers life-sustaining services to Palestinians in Gaza, even in places in the Gaza Strip deemed too dangerous for other international humanitarian organizations. You can make a donation at shutitdownforpalestine.org/fundraiser, or the link in the description. The only thing that separates NCIS from the situation in Palestine more than geography is age. While 43% of the Gaza Strip's population is under the age of 15, the viewers of the NCIS franchise are all in their mid-60s, right in line with the Senate's median age of 65. And that generational divide is not just a major factor when it comes to this issue, but also when it comes to things like climate change, racial justice, and economics. YouTuber Tom Nicholas actually just created an entire documentary about the subject called Boomers: The Rise of the Gerontocracy.
The consequences of what some have called an intergenerational theft have become harder to ignore.
Rent has just skyrocketed. Financial crisis.
I'm going to college soon. It's so much more expensive than it was back then.
How much can boomers themselves actually be blamed for these changes? And how much has just been coincidental to the times in which they live?
Which is available exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service collectively owned by us creators, producing not just longer, uncut content you won't find on YouTube, but also original films and essays from some of the best creators in the game. That includes Broey Deschanel's exploration of taboo scenes in film like cannibalism and obscenity, and even original narrative films like Abigail Thorne's Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. There are even game shows like The Getaway, a fun twist on The Mole, where everyone is unknowingly the snitch. Nebula is becoming the answer to the question, how do you make art and content that is as high quality and interesting as traditional media without the corruption and exploitation associated with that industry? Another cool thing about Nebula is that if you sign up for it using my link, a portion of your monthly subscription goes directly to me, which is a really nice way to help the channel while also getting access to way more content. Seriously, it's really easy to lose yourself browsing through what is essentially Netflix for video essays. And with my link below, it comes out to just $3 a month in this economy. So to recap, Nebula gets you more content, better content, and you get to support me for the low price of $3 a month. Kind of sounds like a no-brainer. That's go.nebula.tv/skipintro. And if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching. Share, like, subscribe. Check out the Middle East Children's Alliance. You can also check out my Patreon, where you can get ad-free versions of all these videos, plus anything that I would have had to cut for copyright issues or anything that got like age restricted on here. Sometimes stuff does. But we also get monthly mailbags. People ask me questions, I answer them. There's little skippies, which are like smaller topics, monthly roundups on all the TV shows I'm watching, live stream watch-alongs. I'm also going to be adding debrief videos where, you know, I do a lot of research for these videos and not all of it makes it in, but there's still some pretty interesting stuff. So we're going to go over those things and kind of answer any questions that are specific to the video. Yeah, it's a fun time. You can also get your name scrolling, which is cool. Bye.